This is Dan Yanofsky, combat editor for the Sporting News, speaking with legendary Randy Couture, a multi-time UFC heavyweight and light heavyweight champion, a Hall of Famer, and a broadcaster with the Professional Fighters League. Randy, you've competed against some of the best in the world. What can you say about the current class of fighters in MMA, especially in the PFL?
Well, I've been very impressed. These guys sign up basically for this format, which means you're going to fight 4 times in 8 months. That is no small task. Figuring out how to manage that process, this format, turning around every 8 weeks and fighting again, front loading that first camp so you're in shape. You can shorten those second, third camps and fourth camps, rolling into the championship if you're lucky enough to make it that far. Seems to really be the task. And we've seen some of the guys really get that and do that very, very well. We've seen some marquee names and some big guys come in thinking they were going to wade through everything in the PFL and really miscalculate what they'd signed up for. So it's been pretty amazing to see these fighters embrace the grind and really get after it, this format.
And with someone like you, what is it about the PFL system, I guess, that you appreciate the most compared to, say, during your prime or even nowadays? Just what's something that really you can appreciate from it that you didn't have, I guess, before?
Well, I think the thing I like about it, obviously, is the meritocracy of it. It's not about talking smack. It's not about publicity stunts. You got to go in that cage and you got to score enough criteria points in those first 2 regular season fights to be in the top 4, to make it to the playoff, and get a shot at that championship title and that shiny new belt. So eliminating, or I guess removing the reward for the publicity stunts, the smack talk, the crap that I think takes away from our sport and what mixed martial arts stands for, is something I really like what the PFL has created. If that's who you are and that's what you want to do, then knock yourself out. But at the end of the day, you still got to walk those 4 steps up into this cage and get the job done if you're going to get the nod in the PFL.
Now, there are various fighters within the organization, say within your weight class that you competed in. There's Ante Delea, Renan Ferreira, Dennis Goltsov, Josh Silveira, Impa Kasanganye. Who is the most Randy Couture fighter on the roster, if you had to say?
Oh, man. Well, I guess you'd have to go to Martin Hamlet. He has a very similar background to mine. Was a 7-time national champion Greco-Roman wrestling in Norway. One of their Olympic hopefuls. He suffered an ankle injury that took him out of making the Olympic team in recent years, but he has a very, very similar background. He's a big, strong, raw-boned kid that's trying to figure out how to implement his wrestling and all his years of wrestling experience into fighting situations, which is exactly what I had to do as well. So he hasn't quite figured out the dirty boxing and some of the nuances of his advantage in that clinch and in that attached fighting yet, but I've sure enjoyed watching him compete. He came up a little short against Impa. Impa was just a little faster and got off a little sooner this season, but he's been a contender in 4 of our 5 seasons in the PFL, and he's a fun kid to watch.
Now, it's someone like him. Would you think you would be someone that would want to help him grow, or anybody on the PFL's roster? I know you're really more on the commentator side and the observer now, but would you have any interest in, saying, cornering someone or just being the person that can help them out in the long run for the future of the company?
Well, I think we've created an amazing environment and facility in Extreme Couture, and we have a number of PFL fighters. Sada Busi is relocated from Sweden, spent his last 2 seasons training with us, trying to shore up his wrestling so that he can make people fight him in the standing position, which is where his background and his strength is. And he's done just that. And I think that's allowed him the success in the last season and now again this season that he's enjoying now. Now he can let his hands go and his feet go without fear of being taken down, because he knows he can scramble. He knows he can get back up. He knows his takedown defense and his wrestling has come that far. So we have a number of the athletes from the PFL and certainly all the other organizations training in Extreme Couture right now. So it's not just about me. It's about that environment, that facility, that place that I started, I created, and brought together a lot of those coaches, a lot of those names and faces that I think are allowing in a very team-friendly, family-friendly or atmosphere. It's allowing those guys to get the things they need to progress, to continue to move the ball, down the road and become well-rounded mixed martial artists. So I get to go in there every once in a while and mix it up with those guys. Not as much as I'd like, honestly, but and still have fun every now and then. Get to go in the gym and work with the guys.
Let's talk about PFL 9, August 23rd, Madison Square Garden's Hulu Theater. I'll be there for sure. I know you'll be there.
Yes.
There's Clay Collard, there's Shane Burgos, there's Olivier Aubin-Mercier, there's Bruno Miranda. What are your thoughts on those fighters and what they need to do in order to succeed? Do you see something from them, saying like training camps or just the way you've heard them speak that just opened your eyes to what they could potentially do down the line, especially as we head to the finals?
Well, I think the guy that everybody's talking about right now is OAM. Olivier Aubin-Mercier, who's last year's returning champ. He's probably, the name or face of Canadian MMA right now through his journey in the MMA, in the PFL. He's one of those cerebral fighters that seems to come up with this, game plan, this way to put himself in the best position to win fights. And then he's savvy enough and smart enough to be able to stick to that game plan and not let anything or anyone sidetrack him or get him off of that plan that he came up with. And he did that against Shane Burgos in the first match of the season this year. That was a tough fight, tough for Shane and tough for Aubin-Mercier. And he knew where he needed to be. He knew he couldn't get into a slugfest with a guy like Shane Burgos. He managed to attach himself to Shane and frustrate Shane and did exactly what he needed to do to win that fight. And we've seen that from him time and time again, both throughout the course of previous seasons, including the season he won, and now on his way for a back-to-back championship. It's going to be interesting to see how he deals with Bruno Miranda and the physicality and the problems that Bruno poses. There's the word I was looking for. That Bruno poses. So he's fun to watch. He's interesting. Now, some might say, oh, he's boring. But, man, he gets the job done. He does what he has to do to win the fights. He's not going to let the boo birds or anybody else take him out of that game plan.
And as we've seen with the PFL format, anything can happen. Last year's champion, Brendan Loughnane, was just eliminated recently, and we don't know what's going on. We saw last year Kayla Harrison get dominated by Larissa Pacheco, who's looking to repeat this year. What is it about, I guess, with all these fighters that are competing, what is it about the PFL format, I guess, for this specific year that has you excited? Is it the fact that there's more opportunities for fighters to prove themselves because there's more competition?
Well, I think we're noticing and seeing certainly that the competition in the PFL is very, very stiff. You got guys like Anthony Pettis that came in, I think miscalculated what he'd gotten himself into even after a season, the second season, made the adjustments, front-loaded his camp better, managed and shortened those camps better, and still, I think, thought he was going to just be able to blow through the talent that we have in the PFL, and that just wasn't the case. Fabricio Verdum, another big name like that, same thing, and, ran into some very, very tough competition. Jesus Pinedo is a perfect example of exactly what you're talking about. Comes out of nowhere. Nobody really knows who he is. He is last year's champion, Brendan Loughnane, in his season opener. Actually, in his second season bout, he lost a close one in his first season bout and literally had his back against the wall, had to have a first-round finish against last year's champion, Brendan Loughnane. I don't think anybody in a million years thought that was going to happen. And he comes out in the first 30 seconds, lands the knee right up the middle, gets a quick six, gets a finish. Now he's going to face Bubba Jenkins, last year's runner-up, who is no slouch, Division I wrestling national champion for Arizona State, a very, very good opponent. And Jesus storms the castle in that fight too. And, Bubba just didn't have an answer for it. He couldn't take him down. His takedown defense was on point. He just waded through Bubba like a Terminator. It was amazing. So 2 fights in a row. There's no way you can say that was a flash in the pan. That was a fluke. This kid is that good, and he literally came out of nowhere from Peru, Lima, Peru. That we've seen this time and time again. Nobody knew who Nathan Schultz was. Not only did he wade through everybody and have some amazing bouts, but did it 2 seasons in a row, and it's just been ridiculously good. And some of the fighters that have come out have just been amazing, amazingly talented fighters.
I interviewed Jenkins before his fight, so I'll take partial blame for the loss as well. So with PFL 9, you have Clay Collard in there, who is a boxer as well. And on the roster as well, you have a few boxers. You have Amanda Serrano, Clarissa Shields, but also Jake Paul, who recently signed and is in the in the super fight pay-per-view division. What are your thoughts on Jake in the PFL and his mission and his influence to oversee the combat sports world?
Well, obviously, he's disrupted boxing already with the crossover bouts. He's been very selective about his opponents in that, but at the end of the day, he's backed it up. He's also shining a big, bright light on the disparaging difference in pay for boxers and MMA fighters and the lack of transparency in our sport of mixed martial arts. So I certainly scratched my head with our format in the PFL when we signed Jake Paul. But I think like Kayla Harrison, like Clarissa Shields, like so many of these other athletes that came from that very strong other background, PFL is going to give him the chance to get his feet under him and figure out how to make the transition from boxing, which he's doing at a fairly high level right now, and get into MMA before he jumps in the deep end, rather. And I think that's fair, but I think when push comes to shove, they've got to throw him in. They've got to throw him in the deep end with everybody else. The rhetoric and the talk will only get you so far. And we've spent a lot of time and energy developing this platform that's not based on any of that. It's based on a meritocracy. So there was the rub in my mind. But I'll get behind a guy like Jake Paul if he's going to show the disparaging differences in our fights and poke guys like Dana White, who's not willing to pay fighters better. And that's something I think, again, the PFL is doing a great job. They're not only just getting a crack at $1 million in that championship bout, they're getting paid each fight along the way throughout the regular season, like any other professional athlete in our society today. So I think the PFL is doing a great job of stepping up, taking care of the fighters better, giving them a platform to be themselves and to go out and win fights. Not highlighting the smack talk, not highlighting the publicity stunts that some of the other organizations seem to want to do, and really kind of breaking it down to fighting in that cage and getting it done in that cage. So those are the things I like about the PFL, that I think the PFL is doing a great job. And I think at the end of the day, if Jake Paul comes in, jumps into the deep end in MMA and wants to be a disruptor in MMA like he is in boxing, good luck. I hope that works out for him. I think it sounds like he may end up fighting Nate Diaz now in our pay-per-view models next year when he finally does step into MMA. And good for him being willing to step in there and agreeing to fight Nate. He's done it in boxing, so let's do it in MMA now and see how Nate fares in an MMA rules of engagement. It'll be interesting.
Now, just a few more for you. Speaking of boxing, Jake Paul and in general, you competed against James Toney not too long ago.
2008.
Yeah, and we definitely understand the parallels of MMA versus boxing, boxing versus pro wrestling, all those mixed bouts. What was that like, and what are your thoughts, I guess, on cross-promotional fights, if they can back it up, of course, like Jake has against the MMA fighters, like certain boxers like Clay Collard going into MMA as well?
Yeah, well, Clay Collard was a mixed martial artist. He went into boxing in the lockdown year when everybody else's shows weren't happening. Clay decided he was going to box, and he boxed 8 times in that short amount of time. And he did it very, very successfully. He derailed a couple of blue chip guys in the boxing world because they didn't give him credit for his skill set. He is probably one of the best boxers that in mixed martial arts that uses his, he's still a bona fide mixed martial artist. He's not just a boxer. And I think, we may not see any of that in this Shea Burgos fight, but we have seen that in some of the other fights he's done. And he's a very, very, very skilled fighter. I enjoy watching him fight, and I love his attitude about the sport as well. But it was interesting fighting James Toney. How much MMA was James going to be able to learn in 4 months going into that fight? And I think we answered that question fairly quickly in about a little over a minute. Wasn't much. He didn't learn how to use his legs. He didn't know what the guard was. He didn't know how to be on his back. I knew, and he had to have known that I wasn't going to play around with him and test his boxing skills. I had no illusions that my boxing is world class. My boxing is very adequate for MMA, to make people wrestle, to get people where I want to get them, which is to rely heavily on my wrestling background. And I think James was on the other side of that coin. He needed to learn enough wrestling to make me have to stand with him, to make me have to feel his boxing and deal with his boxing. And he didn't learn that part. He allowed me to take him down pretty quickly. He allowed me to climb right to mount, which is the worst position to be in a mixed martial arts bout, especially if you don't know what the heck you're doing. So, it was over fairly quickly. Now, I had told him from day one, no, I'm not going to box you. I have no illusions about my abilities as a boxer. I learned and became proficient in boxing to be able to make people have to wrestle me. That was my sole goal. I wasn't trying to change sports. I wasn't going to try and leap into boxing, certainly not at the highest level that James did when he leaped into MMA. And it brings up Francis Ngannou, who's, getting ready to fight Tyson Fury. He's a mixed martial artist, but he did have that boxing and kickboxing background before he made his way into MMA. So he has some base and some skill set there. Obviously, we know he's got the athleticism and the power, but is he going to be able to catch up with a guy like Tyson Fury, who's literally been boxing since he was a small boy? I say no. I think he's got to be unorthodox. He's got to do things that mixed martial artists do in boxing to throw Tyson Fury off. Switch leads, throw from the other side, then switch back and throw off of that. That's going to confuse a boxer who's used to seeing things by the number come at them from a very particular place. And the more unorthodox I think we can get Francis to be, the more chance he has to use that athleticism and that power, that raw horsepower that he has, to give him a shot at winning that fight. And that was exactly what James was up against. That was what Chuck Liddell was so good at. He wrestled at college at Cal Poly. He used his wrestling in a very defensive way to make people have to stand with him and use that old kickboxing striking that he possessed from his early days as well. That's what made him so formidable, was the defensive boxing. So Sadabusi has done, shored up that wrestling and that wrestling defense so he can make guys stand with him. That's going to be the key for Jake Paul. That would be the key for any of these guys. If Tyson Fury decides he wants to try his hand, or we talked to Deontay Wilder a couple of shows ago, and he said, hey, this is interesting. I might be interested in this. This is what, Kayla Harrison is a two-time gold medalist in judo, had to learn about the striking and be able to protect herself and be effective in that range of exchanges so that she could make people grapple her and get them to the ground. And she was very, very good at doing that. So that's two sides of the same coin.
My final question to you, if you could fight anyone from any era in the world, who would it be?
Oh my gosh. Any era in the world?
Any era.
Like if I could go back in time?
Yeah.
Man, I would have to be Bruce Lee. I mean, obviously he's not my weight class, but he, in many ways, I think was the very first mixed martial artist. He was the guy that kind of broke all the rules, went against Wing Chun and Kung Fu in learning wrestling, learning boxing, learning all these other styles and pieces from other mixed martial arts to create what he called JKD and his style of fighting. And I think in many ways, he was the original mixed martial artist.
Well, thank you, Randy, and I appreciate you taking the time. You can tune into PFL 9, the last spot of the playoffs, on August 23rd from the Hulu Theater in Madison Square Garden in New York. Randy, I'll see you there, and I can't wait to hear and see you.
Look forward to seeing you then, buddy. Thanks for having me on.